All right, so get out your notes, kids, please. Let's focus a little. We want to get through this Warren Commission because we've talked about the Warren Commission a bunch. Sometimes it's hard to understand the Warren Commission. All right, before we do that, I want to talk to you about a telephone interview I had with Earl Ruby on December 4th of 2000. And this was done at Roberts High School in Roberts, Montana. And it stemmed from that book I told you. I bought a book on Jack Ruby on eBay. And I found out that the owner was a man named Rob Ruby. And so I emailed him back and I said, you know, what's the tie here? And he said, well, I'm Earl Ruby's son, Jack Ruby's nephew. And we had that discussion about that day when they lived in Michigan and in Detroit, and when Ruby shot Oswald, they actually came and got he and his sister out of class and took him into protective custody. It was that kind of a deal. Well, anyway, he gave me his father's phone number, and I called and talked to him on the phone, and this is some information that he gave me at the time. Earl Ruby was 4 years younger than Jack Ruby. He was 85 years old at the time I interviewed him. He defended his brother Jack. He stated that Jack Ruby loved President Kennedy and respected him very much. Earl also stated that his brother would not allow comedians to make fun of the president in his clubs or talk down to the president. And we mentioned that before, like you kind of see on Johnny Carson or Jay Leno or who's the new guy? Who's the new guy who took over for Jay Leno? Yeah, what's his name? Jimmy Fallon? Yeah. So sometimes they'll make fun of the presidents, and you see that a lot, but he would not let him do that in his clubs. Earl contended that his brother was not part of any conspiracy, that he acted alone in the killing of Oswald, and Earl stated to me that it was his brother's intention to wound Oswald, not kill him, so he'd be seen as a hero. That's just what he told me. And I asked him, well, how do you explain that? And he said that Jack Ruby, his explanation was that Jack Ruby shot Oswald in the stomach instead of the chest or right in the heart area, which is probably true. And he said that the medical staff tending to Oswald were slow to get him to the doctor for treatment. I'm not sure that was true or where he got that information. He also claimed that Oswald was in the hallway for 40 minutes prior to seeing the doctor, which he thought resulted in his death, and documentation really doesn't say that that's true. But that's, you know, that's what he told me in the interview. Jack Ruby, we told you, was sentenced to die in the electric chair, but Earl hired a new attorney, and remember, a retrial was ordered. Earl Ruby also told me in this interview that his brother owed him $16,000 at the time of the Oswald shooting, which would have been a lot more today than, you know, it would have probably been $100,000 now, maybe, or less. He said he paid over $100,000 for Jack Ruby's trial, and he said that Jack Ruby was treated for chest pains rather than cancer early during his prison stay. So what did he end up dying of? Well, but he had a heart attack. He had cancer but died of a heart attack, basically. Okay? Well, that was just kind of interesting. We'll move on to the Warren Commission and some conspiracy theories. Obviously, the years that directly followed the Kennedy assassination, they really had little controversy. Okay? Right after the assassination, nobody really cried conspiracy. However, after the Warren Commission's report became public in late 1964 is when really people began to question its results. Well, to set up the history of that, on November 29, 1963, President Lyndon Johnson issued an executive order number 11130. And this presidential order created a special committee or commission to investigate the happenings in Dallas on November 22nd through 24th, 1963. Now, the official name of the Warren Commission is the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy. That's the official name. But when President Johnson chose Chief Justice of the Supreme Court Earl Warren as chairman of the committee became referred to as the Warren Commission. But if you look on books, like I have a full 26-volume set in my office, and it doesn't say the Warren Commission, it says the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy. There were 7 members of the commission. They were handpicked by President Johnson, and to be honest with you, some of them really didn't want to serve. But Johnson was the type of guy that diplomacy is allowing others to have your way, or telling someone to go to hell and they enjoy the trip. I mean, he was very persuasive, and many of these guys that didn't want to do it, he basically strong-armed them into doing it. Well, the members were Earl Warren, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Now, the next one I'm going to tell you, I want to get your reaction and to see what you think about this person's appointment. The second member was Allen Dulles, lawyer and former what? CIA director. Who fired Allen Dulles? Right after what? The Bay of Pigs. So conspiracy theorists grabbed that as, oh my God, it's got to be a conspiracy. Why would they put Allen Dulles on there? Kennedy fired him. He hated Kennedy. Whatever. Okay? Other members were Hale Boggs, who was a Democratic congressman from Louisiana, John Sherman Cooper, a Republican senator from Kentucky, Richard Russell, a Democratic senator from Georgia, John McCloy, a lawyer who once served as Assistant Secretary of War in World War II, and the more common name you've probably heard of other than Earl Warren is Gerald R. Ford, who at the time was a Republican congressman from Michigan. Those people made up the Warren Commission, and they basically were given the responsibility to investigate three things: the assassination of President Kennedy, the shooting of Governor Connally, and the murder of police officer J.D. Tippit. Those were the three things that the Warren Commission was established to investigate. Now, prior to the executive order given by President Kennedy, who had all the evidence on the assassination? Dallas Police Department. Now, this executive order that was passed by President Johnson would now place all evidence in the hands of the FBI for study by the Warren Commission. Now, I did give you a handout for what it's worth, and this shows all the members of the Warren Commission here if you want to kind of put a face with the name. The back side of it has another specific purpose I'll tell you later, but this was your members of the Warren Commission. Now, this investigation by the Warren Commission began on December 5th, 1963, and ended on September 24th, 1964. So how many months of investigation did they have approximately? 9. And the commission collected testimony from 552 individuals and collected over 3,000 pieces of evidence. And finally, on September 24th, 1964, the Warren Commission's report on the assassination was announced publicly. And it concluded the following: on the basis of the evidence before the commission, Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the assassination. There had been no conspiracy in the JFK assassination or in its results. Jack Ruby acted for himself in his killing of Oswald. Okay? So they were said to make a report on three things. How many of those three things did they actually report on? Which ones? The assassination of the president. Did they, is there any conclusion here on Connally? Is there any conclusion on Tippit? No. Okay? Now, the American people believed the Warren Commission for a period of time, but by the mid-1960s, public signs of dissatisfaction with the Warren Commission findings began to surface. And many reports and books were published with theories about a conspiracy and who was involved. Now, when you talk about conspiracy theorists, the biggest suspects of killing the president become the Soviet Union, the Cuban government, both who hated us, right? The CIA, okay, you're accusing your own Central Intelligence Agency, organized crime, or the mafia, and it even went as far as to blame Vice President Lyndon Johnson for putting together this plan to assassinate the president. Now, two of the first conspiracy theory books were Rush to Judgment by Mark Lane, which was a copyright 1966 that had CIA involvement. And then the next one was 6 Seconds in Dallas by Josiah Thompson. And did Buell mention that in his interview? Do you remember him saying Josiah Thompson, an author, who wrote the book 6 Seconds in Dallas? That was a 67 copyright, and that book said that the Cuban government was involved. Now, I believe I have both of them in here. I got to look a minute. There's so many. Here's 6 Seconds in Dallas. This is actually a pretty valuable book. If you go on eBay, it's worth a little bit, and I have one at home that's signed. This one isn't, but this 6 Seconds in Dallas is one of them. And what did I say the other one was, real quick, like again? Rush to Judgment. Rush to Judgment, right here. Mark Lane, Rush to Judgment. These two books were the first 2 conspiracy books written. Rush to Judgment, Mark Lane said who was involved? CIA. Josiah Thompson, 6 Seconds in Dallas. Okay, now what would the 6 seconds in Dallas refer to? What's he referring to? What's that? 6 seconds that it took to shoot the 3 shots, which is about what the Warren Commission said. Who knows? I mean, that's pretty hard to say. Less than 10, I'm sure. Rush to Judgment, simply a book saying that who was involved? Human government. Okay? Now, there's been, I don't keep a lot, but there are hundreds of conspiracy theory books written on this topic, no question. Many organizations and individuals supposedly suspects. Well, the continued controversy and public pressure to know the truth led to 2 important events concerning the assassination of both President Kennedy and Lee Harvey Oswald. One, the House Assassinations Committee was formed in 1976 to revisit this assassination. That's the year I graduated from high school, and I can remember at those hearings being on television. It's kind of interesting. Another thing that they did is they exhumed the body of Lee Harvey Oswald from its burial site in Fort Worth in 1981. Okay? Now, what's that? Exhumed? What's that mean? Well, they dug it up to see if it was him. Yeah. Because there was controversy that the body that was buried was not him. Remember, he said, "That's my face, but that's not me." He claimed that somebody else, he was set up that somebody else had shot Tippit, somebody else had done this and that. Okay? And so to kind of solve the controversy, Marina allowed his body to be exhumed. And what did they check out about his body to determine it actually was him buried in the grave? Dental records. Okay, and I actually have a picture somewhere of his mouth after they exhumed him. But anyway, he was exhumed. We'll talk about that. Now, this is the House Assassinations Committee report. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I might. Because of the continued controversy surrounding the assassination, the House Assassination Committee was formed in 1976. The committee restudied the assassination from 1976 until 1979. And in 1979, the committee released their official verdict on the assassination. 1. Findings of the Select Committee on Assassinations in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas, November 22nd, 1963. A. Lee Harvey Oswald fired 3 shots at President John F. Kennedy. The second and third shots he fired struck the president. The third shot he fired killed the president. Is that a little different than the Warren Commission? Okay. A1, President Kennedy was struck by 2 rifle shots fired from behind him. A2, the shots that struck President Kennedy from behind him were fired from the 6th floor window of the southeast corner of the Texas School Book Depository building. Number 3, Lee Harvey Oswald owned the rifle that was used to fire the shots from the 6th floor window of the southeast corner of the Texas School Book Depository building. Number 4, Lee Harvey Oswald, shortly before the assassination, had access to and was present on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. And A5, Lee Harvey Oswald's other actions tend to support the conclusion that he assassinated President Kennedy. B, scientific acoustical evidence establishes a high probability that 2 gunmen fired at President John F. Kennedy. Other scientific evidence does not preclude the possibility of 2 gunmen firing at the president. Scientific evidence negates some specific conspiracy allegations. C, the committee believes, on the basis of the evidence available to it, that President John F. Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. The committee is unable to identify the other gunman or the extent of the conspiracy. C1, the committee believes, on the basis of the evidence available to it, that the Soviet Union was not involved in the assassination of President Kennedy. C2, the committee believes, on the basis of the evidence available to it, that the Cuban government was not involved in the assassination of President Kennedy. C3, the committee believes, on the basis of the evidence available to it, that anti-Castro Cuban groups, as groups, were not involved in the assassination of President Kennedy, but that the available evidence does not preclude the possibility that individual members may have been involved. And number 4, the committee believes, on the basis of the evidence available to it, that the National Syndicate of Organized Crime as a group was not involved in the assassination of President Kennedy, but that the available evidence does not preclude the possibility that individual members may have been involved. Okay, my take on that, okay, preclude the possibility, can't find anybody, it's an appeasement. Now, fortunately, not from 1976, I'd say till 5 years ago, nobody really paid much attention. But in the last 5 years, especially on the 50th anniversary, there were a lot of things that were put together to prove that different. And a video came out, a non-conspiracy video, that debunked the magic bullet theory that I haven't even talked about because I don't think it's worth mentioning. That, you know, the bullet curved and went all around like this to hit all these people. Well, they finally did new evidence that shows that Connolly was setting a jump seat. He was in perfect line to be shot with the same bullet, blah, blah, blah. They also, the best one I've seen, and maybe we'll get a chance to see it, was JFK inside the Target car. It came out just recently, a couple years ago. What they did is they made dummies, I think I told you this, dummies filled full of liquid and placed them in the same spots, and then they reenacted it to its exact nature and studied the blood splatter from the new shooting, and the blood splatter, because they did it in neon green and neon red, whatever, matched almost exactly the blood splatter patterns in the limousine in 1963. So there's been a lot of evidence that has come out since the 50th anniversary that debunks a lot of these types of things. So I don't hold any regard to the House Assassinations Committee. They don't have any evidence. They guess and wander about what happened. That's just my opinion. You can bring your own. Now, after the findings of the House Assassinations Committee in 1979, rumors began to circulate that the body buried at Oswald's grave in Fort Worth back in 1963 were not that of Lee Harvey Oswald. And again, that came from Oswald saying that wasn't him in the picture. And because of continued public pressure, Oswald's body was exhumed at the request of Marina Oswald in 1981. The casket was opened and examined by a forensic pathologist, and the dental records matched, determining the body in the casket was that of Lee Oswald. However, as recent as 2015, approximately 70% of the American people believe the assassinations of both President John F. Kennedy and Lee Harvey Oswald were part of a conspiracy. Okay? People believe that. Now, there's a couple things I want to tell you. I can guarantee you that 90% of the people or more that say, I don't believe the Warren Commission, have never what? Read it. No question about it. It's 26 volumes. If you want to see it, come down to my office and I'll show you all 26 volumes. It would take you a long time to read those. Okay? So, again, I'm biased to a point. I'm going to end this because we're done with this assassination. I do not believe in any way, shape, or form there was a conspiracy. I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted on his own. I think the evidence is clear of why he may want to do that. But yet, I want you guys to come up with your own ideas. So, that ends this lecture. Now, here's what we're going to do. So, key into this. This is due Monday, start of the period. You are each going to make up your own test to take. You are going to take this like I do. You're going to take this material I gave you, and you're going to look at some of the tests that we've had, and each one of you is going to design your own test for this. We're not going to take it. I'm grading you on the design of the test. You see the examples I have. I want you to come up with matching or fill in the blank or short answer or short essay, true and false, I don't care. But by Monday, and I don't want to see two the same, by Monday you are to turn in a test that you have put together on this test material. It's worth 50 points in the grade book. If you do a good job and it makes sense, I get to be the judge, jury, and executioner. You look on, I don't care what kind, if you look at your old tests I give you, oh, that's up to you. I usually go, how many do I usually go? 30, 40, 45, 50 sometimes. I'd say no more than 50, but I don't want 10 questions. I want you to kind of get a I want you to look at the tests I gave you. Maybe you want to have some true or false, you want to have some fill in the blank, you want to have some short answer, you want to have some matching. I don't care, but I want you to devise a test for this material, and we will turn those in. Now, obviously, I don't want them written out. I want them just like the ones I gave you, nice on a word processor and making some sense. Okay? That's due Monday at the start of the period. That gives you plenty of time to get that done. Now, we will not have a test on that. We'll hand those in Monday, we will start the burial of President Kennedy and go from there. But this will be your grade for this test material, is you putting together a test that you think you could give the students.
You want us to put our own answers in it too? Or
No,
just
just make the test.
Are you gonna do
Just like the one I give you. Maybe I'll take 5 samples and I'll take your test and see how well I do it. Okay? But I want you to devise a test that you think would be a good evaluation of what people knew. So, don't make it too easy, don't make it too hard. I want you to put a test together that you think would tell you whether, so if Emily gave hers to Allison, that when Emily handed it back to her and Emily corrected it, she'd have a good idea if Allison knew what the hell she was talking about. Okay? Just something for you to put together, worth 50 points. You do a good job, which I assume you'll do. I think it's an easy 50 points. This picture here is certain members of the Warren Commission presenting their findings to President Johnson on September 24th. Okay? This is, you've got in this picture, Boggs, Cooper, Dulles, LBJ, Earl Warren, Ford, Russell, and McCloy. These are all guys as they turned their reports in. These were published. A lot of school libraries, both in college and high school, were given copies of the 26 volumes of the Warren Commission. If you went to buy those today, they only made so many. You can see them for sale anywhere from $5,000 to $2,000 for a set. I got mine out of a guy in New York City, sold it to me for $800. I wrote him another one of those pitiful, I can't afford, $2,000. Would you consider selling them to me for less than that? He sold them to me for $800. The buy of the century. To get all 26 volumes is difficult. There's always missing, 1 or 2. Yeah?
So that guy photographed it. Why was he there?
He was some, I don't know who he was, to be honest with you, but he was some aide to Johnson that probably set up the meeting, who knows. Okay? All right, any questions at all? What do you think of the agenda? Pretty good agenda? I think it's going to be awesome. Oh, before I forget,